Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Respect for People, the Lean Way. This is our third to the last webinar before I take a little break in the late summer and early fall from webinars, just to work on a couple of other projects. So welcome. I'm glad that all of you are here, and good morning wherever you are, good evening and good night and good afternoon. Everyone's spread out all across the globe. We've got people from many, many countries today, and I appreciate those of you that are listening to this live because I know it is very early and very late for some of you. And I would like to invite all of you to subscribe to our list so that you can receive our monthly newsletter, which is very content heavy. We give away free templates quite a bit, and we also have a blog that I write occasionally when I'm not at client engagements and have a little bit. So I'd like to invite you to subscribe. For those of you who may not know me, I'm a facilitator, coach, consultant, trainer, jack of all trades, I guess, and master of many, I think, in the lean transformation space and then just traditional business performance improvement as well. So I teach at University of California, San Diego when I'm not working with clients, and I also have co-authored 3 books with Mike Osterling, and then one by myself, The Outstanding Organization. And I want to make just a quick announcement about metrics-based process mapping, which is one of our older ones. We just got word that Amazon is giving a 50% off discount right now. We don't know how long it will be for. They don't really give you any details about beginning dates, end dates. It's like, surprise, here's a discount. And so we think it's going to be for a couple of months, but if some of you have not gotten metrics-based process mapping because you've been a little scared away of the price, this is a time to grab it because it's now 50% off. And if any of you are working on Excel 2013, the CD has an Excel tool that's quite macro intense, and you would need to email me and give me your receipt, and then I can send you the 2013 version of the tool. We have it available on the CD for 2007 and 2010. So 2013, give me an email, and I will send you the new tool. And the reason why the book is so expensive is that that tool gives you a documentation software package that you can use to document standard work once you've made improvement. And it also has a report form that auto-calculates results when you've designed a future state and you've made some projected improvement and you have projected metrics that you'd like to look and see just exactly how much you're moving the needle toward improvement. So that's a fun surprise we got on Monday morning. As far as upcoming webinars, as I mentioned, this is the third to the last, or fourth to the last, I guess. There's 3 more coming up in July, 2 of them, and in August, 1 of them. In August, we're going to actually have a reprise of one of the webinars that has been the most popular over the years. We've offered it, I think, 3 times now. This will be the 4th, and that's on how to hold effective Kaizen events. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for all 3 of these. And also note the date change. If any of you registered early for the A3 management one, it is now July 3rd, not July 4th, due to client activity. All right, so those of you who are regulars will know that we have a standard, the conventional URL that allows you to get to the webinar materials. We've now changed it. We've simplified it in the spirit of lean, and it's now the domain name, ksmartin.com, for our website, /materials, and that will take you to a page where you can either download the slides, 1 slide per page, or a handout with 2 slides per page. After the webinar, many people have been asking lately, where are the webinars? And they're everywhere. They're on our website, they're on Vimeo, YouTube, and SlideShare, where the materials are also stored. So feel free to pass the word on. They're free. I really am passionate about helping everyone learn. So spread the word on those webinars. Today, what we're going to focus on is respect. And this is something that is starting to be talked about quite a bit in the lean and improvement community, because we've known for a long, long time that Toyota is always talking about respect for humanity, they call it, and then we've kind of tweaked it here a little bit so that most people refer to it as respect for people. And in fact, the Toyota production system used to be referred to a while ago as the respect for humanity system. It's really interesting. And so what we really haven't focused on in all these years and decades now of studying how they operate is, what does that respect really mean? And what do we do with it? How do we create it? So that's the focus of today's webinar. And what I'd like to do is, through the first hour, give you a bit of a macro level framework to think about respect and what it is and how you establish it. And then during the Q&A from noon Western time, Pacific time, to 12:15, the last 15 minutes of the webinar, I'd love to have some great dialogue about the actual tools and practices that we use in the improvement community and talk about how they can help us either build respect or basically be disrespectful depending on how we're applying those tools. I see a lot of disrespectful use of lean practices and tools out there, and I'd love for all of us to vow not to do that. So let's get into it. So what is respect? You know, I always like to start with a little bit of a reflection on what does that word really mean? And how is it used in a business context versus outside of business? So I went to the handy-dandy dictionary, which I always do when I want to know what things are. And what I discovered was that this word admiration really kind of stuck out at me, a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, their qualities, or achievements. And so I thought about that. You know, respect, it makes sense. Respect is admiration. But one of the things that I find I'm intrigued and drawn to right now is there's an awful lot of talk out there in the business development, leadership development community about bringing more love to business. Yeah, love. How often do you hear that word associated with business? And when you think about what admiration really is a form of love. You know, it's not romantic love necessarily. It's not even the kind of love you have for a family member, you know, and a close friend, but it is a form of love. So I'm not going to get into the whole love thing yet because I haven't really figured it all out in my head. And I may never get to it, I don't know. But I do think it's interesting to see that we're making this, I think, much needed transition in talking about these issues that are a little more emotional and I think more respectful, and I think will get businesses quite a bit further ahead than where they've been with some of the more disrespectful environments we've seen. So where did it begin? Well, I think there are three different corners that actually converged in the lean community to get us where we are with this notion of respect. And the first one is what, you know, everyone kind of draws on Maslow's work, Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. And one of the things that I think was interesting about, you know, his hierarchy from the most foundational up to self-actualization is that respect by others was actually pretty high up. And, you know, I learned this hierarchy of needs when I was in college and then again in graduate school, but I forgot that respect by others was as high up as it was. I was thinking that it might be a little more foundational, but, you know, it really is a matter of just getting a roof over one's head and getting food in one's belly and having a safe environment down at the bottom. And then the more innate needs being filled that are more emotional come higher up on the hierarchy. So if you look at the respect by others in the esteem area, excuse me, then that leads into the self-actualization area that focuses on problem solving and creativity. And one of the things that I find interesting is that, you know, while this seems like it's a linear progression, it actually isn't, in that, you know, you can cascade once people are self-actualizing and they're effective in problem solving and using their creativity, then that goes back and it feels, you know, it feeds their self-esteem and confidence, and it goes back and back and back and forth. But it is a foundational element to have that respect area addressed before you can get up to problem solving and creativity. And I think that's the most important message in rethinking and relooking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs for the Lean, Six Sigma, and improvement community, is that we've got to get that foundational respect in place before we're going to be able to really draw on the creative potential of the workforce to solve problems and make improvement. So let's keep that first and foremost in our mind. We have to establish a respectful environment. Have to. Not debatable. Now, if we look at Deming and what Deming was all about, you know, he was, you know, seriously one of the most foundational minds in business world that we've ever seen. And Deming was very quick to point out that we should not be wasting the ability of people, and quick to point out when people were being a bit robotic because organizations would basically ask them to check their brains at the door. And what Deming was a very loving guy, even though he was very gruff, you know, as far as how he talked and, you know, what he was like to interface with. He was kind of a gruff guy. He was actually a very loving and very respectful guy. And that's the one theme that you'll see a lot of as I talk through today's content, that being respectful doesn't mean you can't be gruff at times. And it's a really interesting juxtaposition of respect and how we actually treat people, the words we use, the tone we use, how we say. So I think a lot of times people confuse respect and think that you have to be very, very nice and politically sensitive and just sugarcoat things, and that's actually not respect. That's actually disrespectful to sugarcoat and not, kind of be direct and candid and those kinds of things. So we have to rethink what we're doing when we're, trying to kind of backpedal a bit instead of being very candid with people and starting to push them more toward their full potential. The other gentleman that I think plays a huge role here, and know that he plays a huge role here, is Taiichi Ohno, the industrial engineer that was the primary architect behind the Toyota production system and Toyota business management system. Taiichi Ohno was also known to be quite gruff. He had a pretty sharp tongue, and he was very quick to push people beyond where they were comfortable. And sometimes that pushing came off as being disrespectful, but in reality, when you think about what that respect was really aiming to do, it was actually displaying quite a bit of love for a person in helping them develop and reach their full potential, which then, of course, feeds into business performance improvement, and it becomes a win-win for all parties. So respect for humanity was Taiichi Ohno's main philosophical foundation for how he operated, and that is what then led to Toyota adopting that, of course, and then that's what led us to calling it more frequently here, respect for people. So here's my short list, and it's a very short list, even though it has 6 bullet points, of what I think, from my experience in working with lots and lots of organizations and being in improvement for so long, this is how I view what respect is. I said, first and foremost, and this is kind of playing on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we absolutely have to have a safe and ergonomically sound environment. And what I mean by safe is everything from, slips and falls are prevented, and people aren't cutting themselves and burning themselves and things like that, where safety is number one all of the time. I also, though, am talking about the ability for anyone that's not in an ergonomically safe position to take corrective action right then and there. So, for example, I was working with a hospital, and we were looking at the way, we were actually working on a medication error reduction project. But in the course of going to the Gemba, going to where the work is being done, and looking at the environment where they were getting the medication out of the Pyxis machines and then taking them to deliver to the patients, every single nurse, except for one super tall man, was standing on their tiptoes in order to reach the computer keypad in order to get medication out of this one Pyxis area. And they had this environment there where the nurses were just kind of beaten down. They weren't used to anyone ever listening to their ideas, and I actually witnessed one person one time saying, hey, we really need to fix this, and no one in a supervisory capacity did anything about it. And so what we want to do is create these respectful environments where the nanosecond someone is placing their body in an ergonomically unsound position, or they're walking into an environment that can be unhealthy on any level. It could be light, sound, odor, or any kind of physical safety. That has to be addressed quickly. And so ideally you create an environment where they can fix it themselves and don't have to rely on leaders. But if it is something that requires leadership intervention, then certainly the leader should be extremely responsive to that and deal with issues like that before anything else, because that is so foundational to be having a respectful environment. The other thing that you may not think about that I actually ponder a lot these days is this notion that work that allows people to make errors and work that is filled with waste, both of those environments are highly disrespectful. So picture it this way. You get up out of bed, you get ready for work, and you go into work, and from my experience, 99% of the people, and I'll bet 100% of the people on this webinar, want to do a good job. They want to be able to go to work, and they want to be able to do good work, serve a greater good, and not be hassled and not meet obstacle upon obstacle upon obstacle to be successful, and they don't want to make mistakes. There are very few people that, and they're usually sociopaths, that would say, ha ha ha, I'm just going to go make mistakes today. You know, people don't want to make mistakes. And yet, we create processes and work systems that not only make it highly likely that errors will be made, but they may even encourage errors to be made based on how systems are set up, what the workflow is, you know, who's involved in the workflow, and that type of thing. And then when it comes to waste, you know, one of the things I say all the time about waste is that when you ask someone at the end of the day that had a bad day why it was bad, they almost always talk about people. But it's almost never about the people. It's almost always about processes and systems, and processes not working well. So when we think about what we want to create environmentally, we want people to be able to go in the morning, and we want to capture all of that excitement and that enthusiasm and that desire and that need, frankly, to be successful and make that work environment work. So what does that mean? Well, it does mean you have a lot of work ahead of you. And it does mean that those of us in improvement have job security, because there are a lot of processes that aren't working well and need to be redesigned, be created waste-free. And that's a lot. There's a lot of work because there's a lot of processes in any one organization. But it starts with identifying some of the higher priority ones and just tick them off one at a time, and then continuously improve it, build the culture that allows continuous improvement so they don't regress back to their previous state. Now let's talk about involvement in setting priorities. Some of you may be familiar with Hoshin Kanri, Hoshin planning, strategy deployment, and policy deployment, all terms meaning basically the same kind of practice, where an organization ends up with a very focused set of priorities that they get to through a very collaborative, cascading process of getting employees' input, opinions, ideas about what should be a priority. So this isn't old school cascading goals like I was exposed to in the 80s, where leadership goes out, they decide what the priorities are, then they pass those to the next level and they decide how they're going to support them, and then they pass them to the next level and they decide how they're going to support them. It's not that. It's quite different, actually. It's an actual dialogue, conversation, catch ball, tossing a ball back and forth between the levels until there's consensus around what really matters. And so if those of you that haven't tried it yet, it does take a few years to get good at it as an organization. It's typically done in an annual cycle initially, and then eventually it moves to happening throughout the whole year. But it is a highly effective way to get everyone all the way to the front lines involved in setting what the priorities are for the year. And then you've got the whole organization moving ahead, and it's a very respectful way to acknowledge that the people doing the work are the experts, and they see things that leaders sometimes don't see that need to be higher priorities than perhaps some of the things that are already on a leadership priority list. Same goes with solving problems and making improvement. You know, those of you that are familiar with daily Kaizen or the Idea-Driven Organization, which is a new book that's out by Dean Schroeder and Alan Robinson, those kinds of daily improvement cultures are the gold star for everyone. And so you've got to get there, but on your way to getting there, what you can do at just moving the needle a little bit is getting high cross-functional involvement in making improvement and solving problems, and have the people who actually do the work be the ones making the tactical decisions on how the work should be done. So, you know, the one thing that needs to stop, and it needs to stop quickly, is having leaders not only set strategy, but also dictating the tactical way people should do their work. After all, the leaders are not the ones doing the work. The people who do the work are the experts, and they're the ones in the know. Lastly, last two are together, is being challenged to realize one's full potential is part of being in a respectful environment. So when I work with A3 problem-solving teams or a problem owner and we have a coaching call, very often they'll leave the call just exasperated because they're not where they need to be yet. And I, as their coach, am pushing them to get where they need to be and where I know they're capable of getting. That's the thing. If someone's not capable of getting somewhere, then it is disrespectful to push them in that direction. If they're capable of getting there and you know it, then pushing them in that direction is a highly respectful way to operate. So that's a big one. And then finally, seeing when ideas adopted is probably one of the most thrilling, gratifying things that human beings ever experience. In fact, I was working with a client a month or so ago, and the CEO was on the team I was working with and said the most gratifying experience is having one's ideas listened to and adopted. And, you know, he was kind of this really interesting Zen guy that you didn't think was very Zen. And then he would just say these things in the middle of a discussion, and you'd go, wow, yeah, that's profound. And it is profound, and it is true that anytime, think about it, when's the last time you gave anyone an idea? And it doesn't have to be at work. It could have been at home. And you said, hey, let's do this. And think about what it feels like to have someone either ignore you or say no. And then think about another example of where you've said, hey, what about this? Let's do this. And have that person say yes, and think about how much more fulfilling that is and how that motivates you to then give another idea and another idea and another idea. And so creating that environment is absolutely key to creating a respectful work environment. The other thing I want to mention is back to this issue of, you know, people at the end of the day thinking that it's people that are causing problems versus systems and processes. One of the things I would encourage you all to do is the next time anyone talks about anyone, and I mean anyone, stop and do a little mini root cause analysis. Stop and say, hey, you know, you just mentioned your frustration with Betty. Let's talk about it. What is Betty doing? And let's figure out why Betty is doing it. I don't know why I picked Betty. That probably no one has that name now. But what exactly is the reason why Betty's doing the thing that irritates you? And if you just help people stop for a minute and dissect what's really going on, they'll find that it is indeed a process problem or a systems problem, and it's not a Betty problem 99% of the time. Yes, you could have the one sociopath that got through your hiring sieve, and you know, you can have a person within the organization that really truly needs to go. But by and large, if your hiring process is even remotely robust, you're going to hire people that are well-meaning, well-intentioned, and actually have quite a bit of capability to develop, even if it's a skill set they don't already possess. And so this notion that we should just like get rid of people and bring in new people, you're just going to keep going with the problem you've got, because it's not a people problem. It's a systems and process design problem. Now let's talk about blame. Blame is one of my favorite little subjects. Because, you know what, I finally have realized that it really is human nature to blame. There are very few people that don't go there in their head pretty quickly. When something goes wrong, maybe it's socially indoctrinated in our culture, especially in the West. I think we have a lot more of this. It's a more aggressive, more yang culture than some of the Eastern cultures are. And so I think it is, you know, a bit environmental, but I also am starting to ponder whether or not it's not deeper than that and possibly deeply psychological that we look to blame. But here's the thing, is that when you blame people for a problem that's a systems or a process problem, even if they don't really understand that that's what's going on, they're at a cellular level, they're taking in that, and every time that happens, that person's self-esteem is being eroded. Every single time anyone is blamed for anything, their self-esteem is being eroded. What do we want in the workplace? Very high levels of self-esteem. Extremely high levels of self-esteem, not cockiness and arrogance where the ego's out of check, you know, it's just out of control. We want the ego in check, and we want it to have everyone have high levels of self-esteem. The only way to build high levels of self-esteem is to be successful. Success breeds self-esteem. So one of the things I like to mention is that competence creates confidence, and confidence produces results. So you have to work to get blame out of the system. And it's really interesting, we've got GM that we're looking at right now. It's on the, international stage, and they fired 15 people late last week, in a very blame kind of activity. Now, some of those people may have had criminal intent or real malfeasance. I'll bet not. I do understand that Mary Ibarra is in a position where she has to do something or something fairly drastic to not only send a clear message internally, but also the media, the government, everyone's watching. I understand that, but it isn't ultimately probably the most permanent solution that they could be working on. And I understand that she's working on other things as well, so that's good. But getting rid of people for errors that are system and cultural issues is not very respectful. So what we have to do is work with leaders, and the best thing to do is not put leaders in a room and have a training session and blame sensitivity awareness and anything like that. The best way to nip this in the bud is to deal with it case by case at the moment it happens. And when you're internal, those of you who are internal, you have the ability, if you ask permission, you have the ability to stop a lot of this dead in its tracks when you see it occurring. And little by little, you will shift every leader's mind, and everybody in the culture will shift. I work with clients all the time, and this is exactly what we do. So related to the whole self-esteem thing, the question is, well, how do we get high levels of self-esteem? How do we get people feeling highly respected? How do we get people to be deeply engaged in their work, which they have to be respected in order to be deeply engaged? I certainly, and I bet you too, am not going to put much effort into anything if I am not feeling respected. I'm just going to check out, and I'm going to go elsewhere if I can. And so, this respect is very, very foundational for getting high levels of engagement, which of course produces business results. So when I was writing The Outstanding Organization, I did quite a bit of research on my own client pool. I've been in business now 21 years, so I've got a very, very big client pool. And I also did some research to look at what were the common elements and the common conditions that outstanding organizations tended to have that created great high levels of engagement. And what I found was the three common areas were high degrees of connection, high degrees of control, and high degrees of creativity, that every employee was able to meet those what are innate needs very well, very effectively at work. So let's take them one at a time. Connection means that every employee is connected to the organization's purpose. So the first thing you need to do is define what your purpose really is. And this isn't always easy. Sometimes even the senior-most leaders and or a founder, in the case of a small startup or entrepreneurial organization, sometimes they really aren't clear on what the purpose is, and it takes a little bit of effort to get that clarity. Connection to priorities. So I already mentioned strategy deployment or Hoshin planning, and so involving everyone in that whole process helps connect people to what the mission at hand is and keeps them on track so that you don't have people kind of spinning off and wasting time on something that's not the highest priority for the year. After all, time and resources are quite limited these days. And they need connection to their peers and supervisors, and finally, and most importantly, to customers. Every single person in the organization needs to understand how they are connected to external customers, and then also to internal customers for internal processes. So even those areas that don't ever do anything customer facing, like say the payroll area or the IT department or the even compliance or legal, everyone needs to understand how they support the delivery of value to external customers. And with that level of clarity, you are respecting the person, and you're giving them a lot to hang their hat on to motivate them and get results from the person as well. So we're feeding them, they're feeding us, we're feeding them, they're feeding us in organizations. Control. So here's another thing, is that people get really jumpy about that word control, because it's like, ooh, anarchy, where if we give people control, they'll just run amok. No, they won't. Not with controlled control. So in other words, leaders still set strategy. Leaders still set fence posts and boundaries and clearly define those boundaries, but the people who do the work then have the authority to do what it takes to make the work better within those boundaries. So what I see happening a lot with this control thing is I see a lot of leaders saying cognitively, okay, we understand we should give greater control, and we're willing to do that, so here you go, guys, figure it out. Well, that's not fair either, and frankly, that's disrespectful either, also. And so the reason why that's disrespectful is that if you haven't given anyone the skill set, the development needs that they've got, and the ability to have high degrees of confidence and self-esteem in the work they're doing, they're not going to do well at it, and then you're going to be back to having low self-esteem and not having success. So they have to be given the proper development in order to take on a mission that they may not be ready to take. The other thing is that we don't want to go 180. We don't want to go from leaders having high degrees of control to leaders having no degrees of control. Leaders still have a job to do, and I spend a lot of time with my clients, with senior leadership teams at my clients saying, no, that's not what, you're not going to give that to the front lines. That's your job to decide. And then once you decide that, then they will create the tactical way of working that meets that. That's your job. So keeping people clear on what their roles and responsibilities are, and then giving proper control to the front lines is a wonderful way to not only build an outstanding organization, but to build a highly, highly respectful organization. And then finally, we talked about this a little bit already with Taiichi Ohno and helping people realize their full potential, and what Deming said as well. But that's what creativity really is about. It's about a business succeeding or an organization succeeding, wildly succeeding, because they have developed very properly everyone within the organization to realize their full potential, even if it's tough love at times. Even if it's a coach coaching someone through a problem-solving process and saying basically, no, you're not there yet. Go back to the drawing board, and giving the person some direction on what to do. So creativity is the kind of the cat's meow, as we say. It's the gold dust that you're going for, but it has to be done in concert with giving degrees of control and by creating a highly connected environment for people to operate within. All right, let's talk about some specifics. That's the framework for respect. Let's talk about your onboarding process. If you're a consultant and you're listening to this webinar, let's talk about your client's onboarding process. By onboarding, I'm taking it all the way through hiring, selection, and then the person's first day and their first few weeks and their first few months on the job. So I'm using onboarding very broadly. So here's the thing, I don't know how many of you might remember that Jerry Maguire movie with Tom Cruise, but you had them at your hired. This is your version of Jerry Maguire. You had them at your hired. You will never have an employee more motivated, more hopeful, more ready to serve than you have on day one when they walk through the doors of a new job. Think about it. They have possibly been let go. They have possibly been unemployed for a while, and that really erodes your self-esteem. They may have left an untenable situation at a previous employer and be beaten down. They may have had to move because a spouse or another family member or a loved one needed them in a different location, and may be kind of torn because they liked their job, for example, in the other organization. So when someone comes through the door, it's really important to understand that they probably are coming from a difficult place or somewhat difficult. So they're highly motivated and they're highly hopeful to do well at this job. So what you need to do is bottle that. You need to take all of that great energy and set the stage for the kind of environment you want to have at your organization. The stage gets set from day one when someone walks through the door. So what's the stage need to be? There are tactical misses all of the time. I see it a lot in organizations where people walk in on the first day of work. Talk about disrespect. To not have a telephone or a desk, a place to sit, not have business cards if you're someone who needs to go out, to not have uniforms if you're someone who's supposed to wear a uniform. I had a client where I was working with a Kaizen team, and one of the gentlemen, it was on the new hire process, and one of the gentlemen was only there 2 weeks. And he actually got a bit teary when he talked about it. I mean, he didn't cry, but he got emotional when he was talking about how the first week they took him on these ride-alongs with a very experienced technician. This was a repair organization, and he didn't have a uniform, and a couple of the customers made a comment about him when he was coming in that, he didn't look like he belonged to the organization. And geez, how disrespectful is that to send someone out with a person in uniform, not having a uniform, and feeling like they don't belong to the organization? That is, just a terrible way to start one's journey at an organization. The next thing is the general information about the organization. I find that many orientation programs are benefits heavy and very, very starved for information about the actual company. Maybe they'll get some information on where the locations are and what the product is, but that's not what really matters to fully engage someone and to be a highly respectful experience. They need to understand the purpose of the organization, who the customers are, who the competition is, what the customer values, what the business goals are for the year, and most importantly, if you want to establish a connection, they need to see value being delivered on first, second, or third day of employment. What does that mean? If you're a manufacturer, they go to the shop floor, wherever it is. If you're a service delivery, service or maintenance area, they go on ride-alongs and they accompany a seasoned person doing service and maintenance and seeing the customer environment. If you are a phone, like a phone bank organization that does phone stuff, then they're on the phones first day listening in and listening to the kinds of issues that customers have. If you're in a hospital, they're up on the floor. I don't care if they are in the finance area or HR area or IT area, they're up on the floor seeing care being delivered. So there are ways that you can do this that are not intrusive, but it does take time and it does take resources. But to not take the time and not give the resources for the first few days of a person's employment to set that environment in place is just begging for problems. And so I often will say, this is of course not real, but if a company said to me, we only have time and budget for improving one process this year, which one should we pick? Let me ask you, which one would you pick if someone asked you that? Most people would pick something customer facing or product specific. Not me. I would pick onboarding because everything goes from there. So you can't deliver good products if you don't have good people. You can't have good people if you don't respect them, and you can't respect them if you don't get them going on their journey in your organization from day one in a highly respectful way. Finally, job-specific orientation. It's really important that all procedures, all processes are documented and current, that they're documented in a very user-friendly way. So instead of reams and reams of ISO documentation, everything needs to be very succinct, visual, just the facts, very, very user-friendly, developed by the people who do the work. They will be user-friendly. And everyone needs to be exposed to that, and then they need to, observe, do with someone observing them, and then do, and have an apprenticeship approach to how they do their work. All too often, people are just flung into departments and said, here, go swim. And that's so disrespectful. They need to be eased into their work. I don't care how dire it is and how long a position's been vacant. You don't solve one problem by creating another problem. So that's important. I'm going to stop for a second. I see a question that's kind of related to this. There's a question coming in from Dawn that says, can you describe a respectful way to set and communicate the boundaries for standard work? So Dawn, it's a great question, and there's a long answer to it that I won't do right now, but I will say the bottom line is that the people that do the work are the ones that create standard work always and forever. Whether you use it just a traditional project environment, whether you use Kaizen events, rapid improvement events, it's the people that do the work that create that standard work and decide what the standard work should be. Now, if there are work standards, which are different from standard work, so standard work is process, procedural, step by step, Standards would be something that has to be followed within a step, for example, like we need to set something to 13 psi, or we need to always put the bevel up when we're drawing blood from someone, or we need to always do something a certain way. That's, of course, incorporated into standard work, and that can be mandated by compliance or regulations or law or best practices that you found work. But the work itself, the steps, that's always designed by the people who do the work. So I hope that helps. Feel free to give a follow-up question there. Okay, so something else I'd like to point out is, value stream maps are typically thought of as merely improvement tools, and they are, highly, highly effective improvement tools at a strategic level. But they're also very effective for serving as the similar kind of environment, there's similar environment clarifying tool as the maps you see in shopping malls, in airports. It says you are here, and you can quickly orient yourself to your space, to the environment. In this case, it's not necessarily a physical environment, but it's a value environment. So where's the customer? How are we delivering value? And where do I fit in the process? Who are my upstream suppliers? Who are my downstream customers? To be able to take, so for this as EDI specialists, to take a brand new EDI specialist and show them this map and show them where they are in the scheme of things on the first day is one of the most clarifying things you can do, and highly respectful, so that people know where they fit in the organization and how they directly tie to the customer, even if they're only supporting the delivery of value to a customer. So this use of value stream maps is something that we talk about very briefly in our new book, Value Stream Mapping, but it's something that I'm using more and more with my clients, and they're having high success with incorporating value stream maps into the orientation process for new hires. Highly recommend it. All right, so now let's talk about daily continuous improvement. So most of you know that Kaizen is the Japanese word that is comprised of two Chinese words that means continuous improvement. Most of you, however, are not very effective yet in getting true daily continuous improvement incorporated and embedded into the DNA of your organizations. So I mentioned Dean Schroeder and Alan Robinson's book, The Idea-Driven Organization, before. Those of you that subscribe to my newsletter, I did have a link for that a while. I think it was either last month or the month before last. It is a very important book, very important for understanding how do you actually establish this kind of environment. And it's going well beyond the traditional suggestion programs, but it is somewhat similar to a suggestion program. It's just what you do with the suggestions and how you organize it that's quite a bit different. And those of you in healthcare, Mark Graben and his co-author, and I'm blanking on his name right now, Joe Schwartz, have the book Healthcare Kaizen, which is also very focused on daily Kaizen, and it's very specific to healthcare, but it does apply to all industries. So I highly recommend that book as well. But allowing people to make improvement is one of the most respectful things you can do. Here's a story. I hope I haven't told this on a webinar before. I don't think I have. But I was at a Starbucks a couple months ago, and this is an ergonomic story. I saw one of the baristas, she was grinding my beans, and the bean grinder was kind of back on a fairly deep countertop. And directly above the top of the bean grinder, or the grinding machine, was the bottom of a cabinet. So the picture a cabinet that comes out with doors, and then the bean grinder is kind of underneath that cabinet, kind of like what you have at your house probably for your coffee machine. Well, she was on her tippy toes trying to see whether all the beans had gone down, and she's reaching and taking a wooden spoon and trying to scoop the beans down into the thing, so I got a full bag of beans ground, and she couldn't see anything. And so I'm sitting there as an improvement person going, all she needs is a mirror. All they need to do is stick a mirror on the underside of these cabinets, and then she could just look in the mirror and not stretch and reach and everything, and she could see whether all the beans were ground or not. And so I said to her, hey, to what degree are you able to make little improvements here? And by the way, Starbucks is a very, very well-run company. So when you hear the end of the story, you're going to say, wow, if they can't get it right, no wonder we can't get it right. But you have to do it. I mean, you have to get this right in organizations. So she said, oh, our stores are kind of standard from corporate, and we're not really allowed to do that, and, we really aren't allowed to change anything. And I said, yeah, but what about, for example, just sticking a mirror there that so you could see the beans? She goes, oh, that's a great idea. And I said, well, so I'm giving it to you to give to your supervisor and see if you can get it to happen. And she's like, oh, it'll never happen. Nope, we can't make those kinds of changes here. Well, to make a long story short, I actually contacted Starbucks, some people I know, and said, is that true? I mean, is it that rigid? And they're like, no. Our people have plenty of ability to make small changes to the store, especially if it's a safety issue. And so somewhere along the way, that didn't get all the way to the front lines, or it didn't get to the supervisors. So when you're setting up these environments, it's not enough to just say, we allow our people to have ideas be implemented, and we allow them to implement them themselves. You have to make sure that everyone in the organization sees it that way. And that takes some time and effort, but it's really important in order to get people to be respected and want to share their ideas. So the other thing is, this gets back to Dawn's question. It's uplifting to Kaizen. It's traumatizing to be Kaizened. And you know this. Everyone knows this. How many times has someone done something to you that you had no input into, and you're just expected to live with it and like it? Like Mikey with Life cereal. Eat it and like it. It's horrible. It's terribly disrespectful, because, again, people who do the work are the ones that have the knowledge and the experience to determine how work should be done. So I'm not suggesting that people should be given the authority to decide their work hours, and they don't get to decide exactly where they sit and all that, although maybe, but that's not what I'm suggesting you do as a first move. What I'm suggesting is that no supervisor, no manager, no consultant, no Six Sigma black belt, no lean champion, no green belt is going to design a process and give it to people and say, here's how you're going to work. No. That is so disrespectful, and it is not the way to develop any kind of a culture that you would want to be a part of, and that would allow an organization, that does allow an organization to have incredible results. So that is very much disrespectful to Kaizen people. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that people need to develop. They need to learn. So not everyone, for example, knows how to document a process. Not everyone knows, for example, how to look at the current state and measure it using time and quality, and then use that to establish a baseline from which to measure your improvement. Not everyone even knows what the 8 basic wastes are. So you have to take people through a development process and make sure you don't push someone into an area that they're not ready for. So, for example, what I see a fair amount is that people that should be at master level in order to coach the kinds of problem solving they're coaching are actually down here in the beginning of skill development. So you can't really be an effective coach if you don't understand the mechanics of making improvement. And so you really have to think about this in terms of developing any skill. Think about, developing some sort of expertise on an instrument, in the arts, whether acting, singing, painting, a sport, driving a new type of vehicle, anything that is a skill-based activity. You have to go through, learning and struggling with your scales before you can play a piano concerto, or be on a concert stage. And so make sure that you're constantly evaluating where people are on the spectrum and providing the level of development they need in order to move to the next step. And this is where it gets into that pushing thing. Someone may have low confidence and they're down here in deeper understanding, and you know that they have the capability and the capacity to learn, and their confidence is going to go through the roof when they do. And then that's when, tough love sometimes has to come in as you push someone into that area. But that's a very respectful, very loving way to develop someone versus, shoving someone into a coaching role when they don't have anywhere near the development they need in order to be effective in being a coach. And it just doesn't serve anyone well. It is highly disrespectful. So what I'm basically saying is that you have to do a lot of practice And most organizations, if there's one flaw I see right now, I mean, I see lots of flaws, but if there's one that I would say is pretty common everywhere in terms of making improvement and moving on that journey of transformation, it's that organizations are not spending any money to get seasoned coaches in to help build their coaching capabilities, and so they're never going to move very far. And I'm not suggesting, this is not an advertisement for consulting. It's an advertisement for getting skilled people, highly seasoned people in an organization that can help develop people. And you can either pay someone a fair amount of money that's highly seasoned to bring them in internal, or you can bring in someone temporarily as a consultant to help you along the way. But most organizations are not taking this coaching thing seriously, and that's why they're not moving very fast on the spectrum for transformation. Oops. Okay, so how do we do this once we understand this kind of step-by-step development we need? Well, you want to eventually develop an army of problem solvers, because here's the thing that's cool about problem solving. Problem solving is a high. Most people love to go, yes, we solved that problem. Most people are just completely, overwrought when they have the same problem occurring over and over and over and over. So if you want to be respectful of people, then what you do is create the environment where the problems don't recur, and you're developing them in a way that they become a very, very skilled problem solver, and their critical thinking ability goes through the roof. So in the Outstanding Organization, I divide it into reflective development, where you have a coach that's helping the person see that they've got their own wisdom and they can use their own wisdom to solve problems. And then occasionally they may not know a particular tool to use. So for example, someone who's not experienced in root cause analysis may not even know what a fishbone diagram is, or a cause and effect diagram, or Ishikawa as it's also known. And so you might have to actually teach them and show them what a fishbone diagram is, and that's where we have directed development. But in both cases, there's a coach that's right there that can help people move up the ladder. There's very little telling unless it's very, very needed, and there's a whole lot of asking in order to develop that person in a highly respectful way. So a lot of questioning to move the person forward. The next thing I want to talk about just briefly is this notion of going to the Gemba, or Genshi Jimbutsu, which is going to where the action is, going to where the work is being done. And to me, this is a fundamental practice that a lean leader or an improvement-minded leader absolutely has to embrace as soon in the process as possible. And I'd like to just digress for one moment, well, not digress, but I'd like to share a story with you about one of my clients, a senior VP at one of my clients, that as I was talking about leadership standard work and talking about this going to the Gemba, this happens to be a very, very corporate environment, big, tall, glass building. All the leaders are on the top floor, and it's that kind of an environment. And they're not used to ever going to where the front lines are, or even outside to customer-facing kinds of things. So I was, lobbying for her to start going to the Gemba on a regular basis and see how it would transform her leadership style. And, little by little, she's like, you know what, I want to try it. And then she was very honest and admitted that she was a little apprehensive because she felt like she needed to know everything and that she wouldn't, and that would make her look silly. And I have found over the last 7 years or so, a question about Gemba. Gemba is where the work is done, or where the action is, or where value is being delivered. It's in an office environment, Gemba could be very much like on the phones where customers are being, given advice and things like that. So where the action is. So this VP was had a little bit of trepidation on going and not looking like she was an idiot. And she also was concerned because she was afraid that they would ask for something that she couldn't deliver on. So we went through a little bit of a scripting, or creating some talking points, and then we modified them over and over. So plan, do, study, adjust. And to make a long story short, she's been going to the Gemba for a couple of years now, and finally her peers are starting to do it, and they all report that it has completely transformed how they lead. So the basic rules in going to the Gemba are go, see, ask why, and show respect. Now, what do you do specifically? I've put together a very bullet-y slide here, which I don't like to use very often, but I put a list of a bunch of questions that I've been using at various client locations to help leaders get more comfortable with going and talking to the front lines. Because in a hierarchical company, you could have someone talking to someone that's 6 levels or 7 levels below them on an org chart. So there's a pretty big gap to be filled here in understanding how to even talk with one another. So before you go to the Gemba, of course, you have to establish a very, very safe environment, and there are some ground rules. But these are the kinds of questions that going to the Gemba is. So to me, going to the Gemba as leadership standard practice is about moving the improvement needle forward, helping identify what are the areas that need to be addressed, and mainly learning about what the obstacles are, what the work is, how they actually are engaging with customers, and just getting this amazing insight that then helps make better decisions. It helps feed into the strategy deployment plans that are created every year. All that knowledge is just very, very valuable. So a couple of these questions I think are really important. The how can I help? This is something that people are leaders especially, are shockingly shy about asking because they're afraid that they don't know how to help. And so again, you need a coach that's working with the leaders the first few times, and if not multiple times that they're out going to the Gemba. It's a very important question to ask, and sometimes they need a little bit of support in asking it. The other thing is that the obstacles to success question is the other one that's really important. Basically this is a very respectful question because you're wanting to learn what, if anything, is preventing them from being highly successful so that they can have greater self-esteem and they can get better results, which of course helps the company perform at higher levels. And so that's a really important one. The thing about that one is that when you get an answer, you have to take action on it. So this shifts the leadership's proportion of how much time they're spending resolving problems versus how much of the time they're spending in meetings making decisions. It shifts that a little bit. And then finally, one note I want to make is down here about helping the person see how his work or her work delivers value or supports delivery, reminding them of what the priorities are for the year, and expressing appreciation. This becomes very, there's a tone that people use that people can sense immediately that they're very genuine and they mean it and it's very authentic. And there's another tone that's someone going through a scripted activity. And so you have to make sure that the leaders that are going out there are being very authentic. And when I coach them behind closed doors, I'll call them on it if they're not being authentic. And then something else I wanted to share with you is just this notion of if you want to have a respectful environment, there are things that have to be in place in order to get any kind of change to occur. And if any one of them is missing, you're just inviting this disrespected kind of environment. So for example, if vision is missing, you're going to create confusion, which is not respectful at all. So why are we doing something? What's the business case for this? It becomes very important. If the people doing the work don't have the skills, that creates quite a bit of anxiety, and that's disrespectful. For someone to be having any kind of anxiety is very disrespectful. They have to be incented to make change, which kind of links back to why. Why are we doing this? But you have to make sure that there's not some sort of an actual incentive in place that would be against what the person is being charged with doing. If they aren't incented to make an improvement, there's going to be very gradual change. It's not going to be transformative and aggressive and those kinds of things which you might want. They have to have proper resources. So if they don't have the resources to make improvement, it's going to result in frustration, which again is very, very disrespectful. So I'm working with a client right now where they don't have near the resources they need to do what needs to be done and what their mission is. And, everyone on that team is highly frustrated right now. I mean, I have one-on-ones with them and phone calls and emails, and it's just not good because they're very frustrated. And finally, if you don't have a great action plan that's linked to strategy, you're going to get a lot of false starts and people kind of doing work that may not be the highest priority. So you want to make sure you've got very firm action plans in place. And there's more to it, but those are the biggies that if they're missing, you're just inviting a disrespecting kind of environment. So in the end, what you want to think about in terms of developing a respectful environment is that you want to think about this symbiotic relationship between an employee and an employer. And when I was doing research for the Outstanding Organization, I ran across this term, reciprocal nourishment, by a woman, Catherine Goldwyn-Schwer, and it really is a lovely word, I think, to describe the relationship when an employee is respected and they're giving their all, and an employer is taking that and getting great results and then giving back to the employee, and then the employee is giving more, and on and on. It becomes a very, very powerful way to get tremendous business results and have truly the employer of choice kind of environment that will have you, beating off people that want to get in at the door that are really, really good employees that are going to help you move the needle where you want it to go. So with that, I'm about ready to go into the Q&A. I do want to mention that Michael Ballet, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Michael's work. He has done so much for the lean community, and his father, Freddie. He has a series of books that came out many years ago. One of the ones that you may be familiar with is The Gold Mine. And then another one is The Lean Manager. And this one is his new one coming in July called Lead with Respect. And it's a novel. All of his books are novelized business books. Very, very well written and very deep and helpful, and a great way to see what leading with respect really looks like. So even if not for you, even if for one of your leaders or your leadership team, it's being published by the Lean Enterprise Institute, but of course it will be available on Amazon. It'll probably be up within the next couple weeks on Amazon, so you can buy it. But I'm very excited. I've read the draft. I've also read part of the final, and it's a very, very good book. So with that, I'd like to invite you again to join us at the Karen Martin Group, subscribe to our list, meet us up on social media, spread the word about the webinars, and turn to the books if you would like some additional help in understanding some of the concepts. So thank you very much. Let's go to questions. We didn't have any questions during the registration process this time, but we do have questions coming in, and I'll go up until 12:15 Pacific Daylight Savings Time. So 15 minutes, 13 minutes. Okay, first question. I would like to ask, what would be the first or the main thing you would focus on when taking the job as a lean leader in a production company after a couple of previous colleagues whose focus was mainly on the use of the lean methods instead of people development and creating the respectful lean culture? Oh, this is a long question. The culture is now a mess, and the people have absolutely no respect for other people's ideas, what leads to the fear of being seen as the one who tries to change things, so kind of the opposite of Kaizen culture. All right, so what would be the first thing I would do? Well, I do this a lot. As a consultant, I go into highly cynical environments a lot where someone has been there and has done damage to the improvement process. So the first thing I typically do is get very, very candid with, look, I know you weren't exposed to you didn't have a great experience here. I understand that. And I'm here to tell you it's different. And this is if my clients, and in your case, your leaders, agree that it is really different. You really are establishing a different environment. You can't say that if you can't back it up with proof. So it is different. And I understand that you're not going to trust me right away because you have no reason to trust me. You don't know me from Adam. However, what I would like to ask is if you would just please just do an experiment with me and think about, and this is what I actually say, think about just getting in the car with me as a passenger, let me drive for a little bit, and then you can get out at any time if you see that this is not what you signed up for and it is the same crap that you were exposed to, but just come along with me on the ride, try it, just trust me enough to try it, would you? And usually people say yes. And then you have to really back it up with proof. So the next thing I would do is I would do a twofold development track. The first thing I would do is developing an idea program where people are very clear on what they have the authority to decide and make suggestions about and what they do not. So you have to get that line very clear first. And then I would invite them to start, looking for waste and looking for opportunities to improve. And this is at the front lines I'm talking about. And then you have to carry through on it. So, the first 5 ideas, I like to broadcast things. I love idea boards, even if it's a flip chart in a work area, or it could be a wall in a common area. This is the person's idea, and you'll see the actual format for these cards in both Dean's book and in Mark Graban's book with Joe Schwartz as well. There's, any number of formats you can use for the cards of, here's the problem that this would solve, here's the idea, and then you have to carry through on either evaluating it and helping the person understand that perhaps it didn't meet the confines that were, set for them in terms of what they have the authority to do, or maybe it did and it's too expensive to do right now and it's going to be delayed, but you have to just be able to set those parameters up front, for example, and say it can't be a high-cost idea. That's not what this is about. This is about leveraging our existing resources. So I'd be working on that frontline idea area right then. The next thing I'd be doing at the same time is I'd be working with managers and above in helping them become incredible problem solvers themselves, and then teaching them the coaching skills and coaching them through that development process so they can become coaches of other people. And so I typically use big projects, big problems, using the A3 management format to coach people on problem solving, and then become the second coach to coaches once they have that skill set in place. So you can drop me an email if you want any more information on that, or possibly look at the A3 webinars and attend the one next month. That will help a lot. So I would work both ends. You want to get some big results quickly. You want to teach leaders how to coach, but you also want front lines to get engaged as quickly as possible. And by the way, if you're not doing strategy deployment, that's another thing I do, is I'd be convincing leadership that you need to get a very clear set of organizational priorities that they have full consensus on, so that you don't get jerked around and it's not the squeaky wheel kind of thing. You want to have a clear plan that that's basically your mission is to get improvement done through that plan, or to meet that plan. Okay, so next question. Hang on, here we go. Referring to the action plans that you referred to as causing false starts when they are lacking, who in the organization is responsible for developing those plans? How would you recommend developing those? Good question. All right, so let's go back to that slide. So it depends on the level of improvement. When it comes to strategy deployment, which is a very high-level, macro, leadership-heavy process for establishing priorities, which I already mentioned the whole catch-ball part of how you get everyone's input into that plan. Once you have consensus around that plan, that's typically done on a fiscal year, and it's typically the, limited number of priorities that the organization needs to focus on. Ideally, all of those priorities are framed in problem statements, not in solutions. So rather than, we're going to do this, it's we need to solve this. And so that becomes an action plan that helps prevent false starts by departments, saying, oh, we want to work on this. Well, that's not one of the organization's highest priorities. So it's robbing resources, taking resources away from the focused plan that you would need. So that's at a high level. At a micro level, you can have an A3 that's solving or mid-level, we'll say, solving a bigger problem, but, not something that's a frontline kind of thing. And then that A3 will have an execution plan that's on how are you going to, once you get through the full problem definition and looking at target conditions and defining that and getting through root cause analysis and gap analysis, then eventually you'll have some sort of a implementation plan or execution plan where you're going to try out some results. So when you decide to try out the results, then that needs to be a very clear action plan with dates and owners and who's doing what and all of that. And then the micro level of an action plan could be, for example, within a Kaizen event or a very short cross-functional focused activity where you're making improvement, and there are a couple different pieces to that improvement, then there's, someone owns it and is taking the lead and making sure that gets done, and there's dates and times and that type of thing. So, really almost everything you do at any level needs to have a very clear action plan with ownership and dates. And then it needs to be, of course, monitored. And the action plans, by the way, just a quickie, need to be flexible enough that if you're moving along improvement and you make a really important discovery in the improvement that would change the items on the action plan, change them. I mean, it doesn't have to be set, and it really shouldn't be set in cement. If you get good information that needs to be challenged, then you need to change the action plan. What you do want to do, though, is make sure you stay away from what's commonly done with a lot of distraction and the shiny object. New shiny objects come, and then people go, oh, let's forget this action plan. Let's go do that. You don't want that. You want only deviations from the action plan when they're really warranted. So I hope that helps. Let me know if that does help, David. Okay, next question. How can we impact, this is from Gustavo, how can we impact a director high level that is not the best talking about respect for people? Yeah, this is a tough one, isn't it? Okay, so a couple things that I do. First of all, are you internal or external? You're probably internal. I mean, I'm going to assume you're internal for right now. When it depends on what level, who you report to, and what level of authority you have in your organization. So I, as a consultant, typically have a pretty good, I'm pretty tied to senior leaders, so I can do an assessment about culture and leadership style and stuff like that, and then give them a sanitized report of overall, here's what I see. I do see you've got, some development needs here, and you have some development needs there, and, blah, 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 blah. And so often I'm doing an assessment to look at leadership capacity for, creating this kind of an environment. Now, if the senior-most person in the organization is the person, I know you're talking about a director, but if the senior-most person, then I personally typically walk away. Now, if you're internal, you've got to make a decision whether or not you can continue to work at a company where respect isn't something that the highest level in the organization has, because it's going to be very difficult to get the senior leadership team to operate in a certain way if the main person is not operating that way. So that's that. Now, if in this case you've got one director who is the only one that is not displaying respect, then that person, you need to have a conversation with them, and I don't know whether it's you alone or if it's you with HR or if it's you with whoever you report to, but that establishing that kind of environment is critical for making improvement. And so, when I'm working with a client, if there's a director, then I go to my contact and say, hey, we really need to talk with, so-and-so. I just witnessed her or him doing this, and, that's really not in line with what we're trying to accomplish here. And then we have a conversation. And then, that conversation allows you to assess whether that person has the capability and desire to shift their behavior or not. And if they don't, they have to go. I always say that when you go down a lean or a improvement transformation kind of path, it reveals every organizational weakness the organization has. And so sometimes there are people that just don't want to go with the new program, and in that case, they need to find another home. So you can only take people so far if they have no desire. Okay, next question. When advising leaders on releasing control, how do you determine what leaders should control and decide versus allowing those who do the work to control? Good question. So I didn't put a slide in that I almost put in, that I show a fair amount where there's a line, so picture a horizontal line across the middle of the slide. And above the line are senior leaders, and below the line is the front lines, and middle managers are on the line. And above the line is strategy, below the line is tactics. So when it comes to a value stream, for example, the whole way that work is delivered to, and value is delivered to a customer from request to delivery, then leaders are the ones that should determine strategically how do they want to operate. So it's more about, what should happen to deliver that value. And then the baton gets passed to the front lines for them to determine how they're going to do that. So it's a fairly clean line in the sand, except for the middle manager role where they're kind of involved in both levels. It's a pretty clean line in the sand. Then, for example, in chartering, I don't know if you heard last month's webinar, but it was all about reducing resistance to change. And part of the way to do that is by having an extremely clear charter for every improvement project or everything that's being done, every problem that's being solved. And in that charter, part of what you do is the leadership team gets to set boundaries before they pass the baton to anybody else. So for example, I'm going to a client in 2 weeks where we're going to be looking at the whole way they do estimating. And we already know that there's one particular customer group where the needs are very different than any other customer group. So the leadership team has already set the boundaries that the team making improvement has to make sure that they're able to meet blah, blah, blah. So there's predetermined targets that they have to hit, whereas they don't have to hit that for other clients. And that's totally within their realm, and it's very much where they should be in determining that strategy and drawing those boundaries. So it's just clarifying what a team can do, what they can't do. What should not be allowed is for a team to, let's say that they decide that I just had this happen actually not too long ago, where someone wanted to put standard work in a particular format, and it was really good, and the whole team loved it, and then a senior leader took issue with it and said, I don't like that format, I think it should be this way. Well, that's not appropriate, that's disrespectful, and that's not passing the baton. And so I had a chat with that leader. It was awkward, but we got through it, and the team got their way, and that's how you start building that kind of a culture. Okay. Last question is from Marty, and it says, actually I probably shouldn't have said your name, I'm sorry. How do you approach improving a bureaucratic process that lacks significant resources and support? Well, if you don't have resources and support, look at your screen. It's back to this effective change. I don't know that you can, to be honest. If you're not being given the support to do it, who wants to change it, I guess, is the question. Because if the leadership team doesn't feel that it's a top priority, then, I wouldn't go there. You may have to lobby them and prove and use data to sell them on why it is a priority or should be a priority, but that's the sales hat that a lot of improvement people have to put on before they get the authority to go ahead and make an improvement. But then they have to be able to provide resources, or what are you going to do? I no longer believe that improvement people should take on stuff that they don't have the resources to do. They should just really say that I can't do this, and you use data as much as you can to prove why you're making the point. So with that, I hope that was at least a bit of a framework to think about, maybe provoke a little bit of discussion in your organizations with your leadership team on what respect is, what it is not, and how to establish a highly respectful culture. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope to see you in the next webinar next month. And have a great evening, a great morning, or a great rest of the day wherever you are. And lean on. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.